Welcome everyone to another Design Ops Aligned podcast. I am welcomed by a very special guest, well-renowned in the UX field. If you're on LinkedIn and you've never seen her, then you are not connected to the right people because Sarah is everywhere. And I've seen Sarah on LinkedIn for a very long time, and I'm very privileged she's come to our show to speak on it. So Sarah, lovely to have you here. And would you like to do an introduction to yourself to people who might not know you?
Yeah, thank you. I think you did a great introduction, but briefly, my name is Sarah Doody. I am a UX researcher and experience designer. It's kind of been my niche for my whole career. And around 2017, I started to kind of pivot and got into the world of UX education and career coaching. And these days I run a company called Career Strategy Lab, which has a wide range of products and services, free, paid, etc., to help people advance their careers.
I'm going to dive straight into it, Sarah. You started a Career Strategy Lab in 2017 from the research I've done. And why did you find it was the right time to start it at that point?
Yeah, so back then, looking at where my own career was back then, I was intentionally trying to figure out how I would not start a UX consulting agency. And for context, at the time, I had been living in New York, or I was living in New York City. I'd been a full-time employee at a couple of places, and I was doing my own consulting, some consulting with other UX agencies. And it got to the point where I realized there's so much work. I either need to hire other people or figure out something else. And I knew for the lifestyle I wanted to live and what really made me happy, let's say, I didn't want to manage a big team. And I didn't want my calendar to be meetings all the time. So I ditched the agency route and I started dabbling in online courses, and I created a UX research course. I created General Assembly's first UX immersive. That was back in 2012, so over a decade ago. And then a lot of people were asking me, how do I make a portfolio? And I created a class about it, sold it for like $29 or $39. People started to get hired, and then they wanted more help with their interviews, with their resume, etc. And, at the time, no one else was teaching that. And so I kind of just went all in on that. And of course, like any product, it's had many iterations and names and versions and things. But that's really how it all started. It was really out of demand from the market and selfishly for me, an alternative to building an agency.
I want to dive in because one of the key things that you mentioned about, I'm going to use the terminology CSL.
Great.
So with CSL, you promote it as not being a boot camp.
Correct.
Now, I want to get your take on that. Why did you position yourself? And I love it. And I'll give you my 2 cents before you answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
My perception, and probably people will hate this, I believe that the bootcamp industry is really not producing great results. And I think what's being happening is that the people that are coming out of it are not being given the skills that are needed. Now, why did you position yourself as not a bootcamp, and why was that so important?
Yeah, so we intentionally said we are not a boot camp because we kind of had similar observations as you. The other main reason that we positioned ourselves that way is because having myself in 2012 created the first immersive 12-week program at General Assembly, and then creating this suite of essentially 6 courses, which comprise our 3-month career coaching program in CSL, I recognized that I believe it is extremely difficult to teach people how to do UX and also get them hired all in the same container, let's say. And I know that because I have, however many years since 2017 worth of data that tells me people from every major boot camp, including undergraduate and master's degree programs, come to us because their boot camp or university career services program is not resulting in them getting hired. And so we wanted to position ourselves as really the experts in helping you be ready to get hired or get hired if that's your immediate goal. Because a lot of people ask me to create a boot camp and I tell them, I don't want to do that because it's going to distract my team and I from being the very best place to learn how to advance your career either now or in the future. It's like a product, if you're a product and you keep adding more and more features to your product, the product gets diluted, right? And so that's how we look at what we do. Could I make a boot camp and sell it? I'm sure I could, but that's not the business I want to create.
Everyone's going to see me switch headphones. I'm just having such a bad day with headphones at the moment, but yeah, it's my work headphones. So even though I have this little antenna, I apologize to everyone.
No worries. Real life.
Real life. I love that. And it's just like I like the raw uncut version.
Yeah.
I love that you kind of mentioned that the way you have not positioned yourself as a boot camp. And I think one thing I wanted to get your take on is when people come to your course, what are the main things? What are you seeing similar patterns that people come to you for help? And what is the kind of what are these kind of patterns that you are seeing?
Yeah, gosh, there's a lot of patterns, but many of them kind of fall into a couple of categories. One category would be I've been applying to jobs for 4 months, 6 months, 12 months, 200, 400, et cetera, jobs and not getting interviews. Some people are getting interviews, but not getting offers, and they're having trouble kind of troubleshooting where the disconnect is. Then we have a lot of people who are not interviewing yet because, they're not applying yet also because the thought of getting all their what we call career materials, like marketing materials, resume, portfolio, LinkedIn, et cetera, getting all those ready to go is almost so overwhelming. It's like paralyzing, right? When you have a big project and you just keep procrastinating because many of them have full-time jobs or they, have responsibilities outside of work, kids, caretaking, whatever it is. And they don't know how to do all that in the amount of time that they have. And then there's another category of people that join because they're happily employed, but they want to figure out what might be the next step in my career. And many of these people have been working in the field for 10, 15, 20 plus years and are thinking about what do they want their next chapter of their career to be. Or for some of them, the last chapter, if they've been working for like 20 or more, 25 or more years, that has been the most surprising, to be honest. So yeah, we kind of have these people who are being proactive in their career, those that are overwhelmed at the thought of doing everything to be ready to apply, and those who are applying but not getting the results they want.
Sarah, I want to get your take on this. Like, what do you think is the current state of the market at the moment from your perspective?
Yeah. I think it's tough. I won't sugarcoat it, especially for people earlier in their careers, going back to, the boot camp business model. It's a supply and demand issue, in my opinion. And to your point about what the candidates in the boot camps are being taught, they may have knowledge of software and processes and methodology, et cetera, but they lack a lot of the soft skills, if we can say
Yes.
that, and business experience that companies are looking for. So that's one of the challenges. However, I will say, and actually today we just had a podcast episode on our own podcast come out about the outlook for 2025. And the gist of that episode is that companies are hiring. And if you look outside of big tech companies, you will find a lot of roles. I talk about finance, healthcare, travel, education. There's one more that I'm forgetting. But if you can let go of, sometimes your ego wanting to work at a FANG or MENG company and realize the grass might be greener at a healthcare company or a travel company or a UX designer for your local municipality's, government website or something. And we've had a lot of people get hired into industries that they had never even considered before. And then they say, you know what, this has given me a higher salary and better work-life balance than I would have had working at, say, Meta or something like that.
Yeah. You hit the nail on the head on that, Sarah, because I think and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong with this, I think what I see is that social media publishes this type of role as the creative side, and they get shown that, you're going to do all these fancy animations and make things look good, but for me, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, I think that's 20% of the job. Some people say 40%, but in my experience, I've seen it as being 20%, and 80% is the ability to communicate and speak the business language. And what I see, and I don't want to give away my age, you probably can see my gray hairs, but when I was...
I've noticed them too for myself, so I can relate.
But, I was taught to show the value of design by, either you have some form of metrics, or you have a framework, or you just speak the business language. You try and get your designs in by saying, hey, if we do it like this, we could see an uplift in XYZ, or our brand might be better received. And what I'm seeing designers nowadays is that they just say, we got to make the UI look pretty. And
right.
What's going on? And what's your take on that? Do you think that we're not teaching these people that are coming in the industry the raw, basic forms of communication?
I think you're right. I think, looking at the skills that people have coming out of bootcamp programs and some undergraduate programs also, part of the problem that they have with creating their portfolio is the inability to communicate the details of what they did, why they did it, how they did it, what happened, etc. And my I was going to say hunch, but I guess it's more of a philosophy, is that if you can't do that for your portfolio, then how are you going to do that in a meeting, right? And so I think one of the cool things about what I've created with CSL is that, sure, it helps you with your portfolio, but it also helps you succeed in your role once you're hired, because you are learning those skills. But, looking at what so many boot camps teach, it is, somewhat surface level in terms of, we'll teach you software, we will teach you methodologies, you'll learn how to do a design sprint, etc. And we all know that very few projects in real life tick, follow the design sprint checklist to a T. You know, there's always some problem or constraint or stakeholder that comes in and blows things up. Some new knowledge or data that you thought existed and doesn't, or does exist and you didn't know about, et cetera. And yeah, I think too, you know, there's such a focus on the visuals, especially on LinkedIn and Instagram. It's just flooded with like, which UI is better? And the discussion is never about, well, who's the user? What was the goal, et cetera. And it's like, I love getting inspiration from places, you know, and the dribbleization of things.
Yes, the dribble.
But that's not the real world.
But Sarah, do you think this has happened? Okay, let me actually take 2 steps with this question. Do you think hiring managers have given a rise to portfolios being focused on UIs? Now, you make a very good, as you say, you speak very highly about portfolios. You know, I think a lot of your LinkedIn posts are focused around making your portfolios great, showing your process, you know, showing where you went wrong, what you tested, what didn't work. But do you think hiring managers are actually looking at that? Or are they actually looking at the UI polished stuff and saying, hey, that's great, let's put that person forward? What's your take on that?
So, I mean, I can only speak from the discussions I've had with hiring managers and the feedback that I receive from people in my program. And very often people in my program who have interviews and get hired say things, and I'm paraphrasing, but, you know, after I presented the projects for my portfolio, I was complimented for the story I told, for the details I provided. And the hiring manager, and some people have even said people in their interviews were taking notes so they could improve their portfolios. And same thing with hiring managers. Like, it's not just about the interface. They want to hear what I just described. And I think looking at the portfolios of people who are applying to hundreds of jobs and not getting interviews, it's because oftentimes their portfolios are kind of just like photo albums of screenshots and Figma screens, etc., that lack a story, that lack an explanation. So I am more than happy to take that stance. That it's hiring managers are not just looking for the visuals. They want to see the process, hear what went wrong. They can spot portfolios that are just kind of visually oriented and showing every step of a design sprint a mile away. And they don't want to see that.
No, absolutely. And I think, you know, there still are those great hiring managers that do look into that. And I know I might go off a bit topic on this one, but what I'm hearing from hiring managers, they're just getting inundated with so many applications. And I've even spoken to people who come from the UX field and they're like, hey, I'm going for like at least 200, 300 portfolios in just one application in just 1 week. Yeah. And it's like, how do they even have time to even look at everything so clearly? And these were UX recruiters. They say, hey, sometimes we just had to go with the aesthetics first and then put them through the process and then start to dissect. So, you know, there's no right or wrong answer. I just really wanted to get your take on it, that, you know, are we putting too much emphasis on the portfolio, in the portfolio requirements? And are we losing the fact of that one-to-one interviews and really dissecting from a face-to-face interview? I mean, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to put yourself in the shoes of those hiring managers who, like you said, have hundreds of applicants, and that's just for one role they're hiring for. What if they're hiring for 4 roles at a time, right? That's a lot of candidates. And so every hiring manager likely has a different approach. Some may start with the portfolio. Some may look at your LinkedIn first. Some may look at your resume first. And I interviewed, I think it was 4 or 5 different hiring managers, and we turned it into a podcast interview. And many of them describe different ways of vetting candidates and different starting points, if we could say. So I think candidates often put a lot of emphasis on portfolio, and then by the time they're ready to apply, they're so exhausted and burnt out of working on their portfolio that their LinkedIn isn't updated and their resume is lacking. And so if they're applying to jobs and not getting interviews, it could be maybe they do have a good portfolio, but their LinkedIn and resume weren't up to date. And that may have been the reason why they didn't get an interview. One thing to remember, though, I think, is even though you're seeing so many hundreds of candidates for many of these roles, many of those candidates who apply, first of all, don't follow the directions. And I see this because I have a bunch of LinkedIn posts saved in my LinkedIn where recruiters or hiring managers say, I'm hiring for a role, 200 applications. Here are the mistakes people made. Didn't follow the directions.
Yeah.
Couldn't access their portfolio because they didn't provide a password. Link to portfolio didn't work, etc. And when you have hundreds of applications, like, they're not going to hunt you down to get the link, So for anyone listening to this, I would say don't be deterred by seeing hundreds of applicants, because if you just follow the directions and tell a story in your portfolio of consistent messaging across all your materials, you'll be ahead of a lot of those people.
Okay. I like that. I'm gonna take a swing at this one. So when I started my career, and again, I'm not gonna give my age away, I still feel young. But I remember when I started, everyone wanted what they called the ninja, unicorn, you name it. There's different names. Somebody who can wear multiple hats. And then I went through the stage with the career where we moved from the generalists to the specialists. And now it seems to be moving back to the generalists or unicorn kind of requirement. What's your take on that? And how do people subjugate their portfolio to be a unicorn when there's so much demand for certain... Okay, let me actually put that in a better way. How does somebody build a portfolio when they want to become a unicorn?
Yeah. I mean, if you have the experience, then I think one of the best ways to create a portfolio that shows the wide range of your skills is, let's say you have 3 projects in your portfolio. Instead of each of those projects showing kind of the start to finish process for each project, I would argue, let's make each case study focused on one of your primary skills. So maybe one of the projects is more research oriented. Even if you did design for that project also, make that one maybe research oriented. Then make the second case study more design oriented, and make the third one more, product strategy oriented or something like that. And that achieves a couple of things. Number one, if someone is skimming through your portfolio, it's easier for them to see those 3 skills, but also it helps the portfolio not feel super repetitive. Because if you're a hiring manager and every project is like discover, design, iterate, or launch, iterate, test, whatever, it gets old and boring pretty quickly. Whereas if it's a deep dive into these 3 areas, that puts those skills on display.
I like that. That's a really good way to put it. I would actually do that as well if I started applying again. So, Sarah, how challenging it is to get a job. You speak to so many people. Do you also teach people that when they get into the job, that's let me put it in a better way. The applying is just 10% of the journey. And when you get into it, you're fighting an uphill battle in business. And my 2 cents, and you can, again, this is what I've experienced in my time, and even speaking to people on the podcast, businesses are not seeing the value of design. They're not really utilizing UX designers, even researchers, in the right way. Do you teach people about this, about the uphill struggle that designers are going through on a day-to-day basis?
It is something we are thinking of adding in 2025. I'll say that. Okay. Kind of the notion of you're hired, now what, However, based on some feedback we've received, a lot of people have said, and I keep going back to portfolio, but a lot of people say like the way that we taught writing the case studies or even writing bullet points on your resume helped them, for example, create a report of research findings that was more well received, or make a case for adding a feature or removing a feature or something because they learned these communication tools that sure can help you make a portfolio. But at the end of the day, I often say we should call, the company the communication strategy lab instead of the career strategy lab, because so much of it is about learning how to communicate what you did, your value, the value to the company, et cetera. And that, can translate well beyond your portfolio, resume, et cetera.
I want to take a stab at what you mentioned in the beginning of the podcast. And I want to get your take on, are we going through an ageism culture right now, where these very high skilled people are not being hired? And I wouldn't put solely on age. I would put it that they demand more from a salary than they would from a mid-level or a junior. Now, what's your take on that?
I hear this all the time too. People who feel like they're up against ageism or have blatantly experienced it, which is terrible to think that, that exists and people will be told they weren't a fit for age-related reasons. It's just mind-blowing to me. However, I will say, I think LinkedIn, it's such a powerful tool, and it's such a negative tool because it allows negative stories to gain so much traction that then people forget that for every post they see about, ageism and toxic interview processes, et cetera, there are plenty of other companies where that doesn't exist. And I know this because I have, like I said, people who've worked in UX for 20 plus years. I mean, those people are not 30 years old, they're in their 50s and honestly 60s. And they've gone on to get hired because there are definitely companies out there that recognize the value of that experience. And, maybe that person who's in their 50s or 60s, a startup might, not interview them. But honestly, maybe that person wouldn't want to work there to begin with, I think if you are hearing stories and seeing examples of that, those can be indicators of companies that maybe you don't even want to apply to.
Yes.
And I think this is where it's so important to invest in professional relationships, especially before you need them, because, if you're later in your career, you probably have people you've worked with or people you've known in the industry that are of similar age as you maybe. And that could be a great opportunity to turn to those people and find out, is their team hiring? Is their company hiring, et cetera? So I know that was a little bit of a roundabout answer.
No,
I
I
mean,
know.
it exists,
It's
but I don't think it's like as big of a issue as you would make it, as you might think it is, because of the amplification effect that social media has, to be honest.
Enjoying the content? Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn, TikTok, and Instagram for more updates. Your support helps us bring you even more great content. Now let's get back to our podcast.
No, you make a good point, and I think it's such a hard question to answer, and I think it's as you just mentioned, LinkedIn does promote certain things, which does pick up traction, and then it starts becoming the norm.
Yeah.
Can
I add one more
something?
thing? Yeah.
Go for it.
The other thing, and I hope this doesn't come across as controversial, but the other thing I think is like, when things don't go in our favor, in any situation, we all want to assign a reason why, right? Because we don't like uncertainty. And if we were to go deep dive into like psychology and everything, our brains are wired to do this. Like, they don't like uncertainty, and it will create or assign an ending to the story or the uncertainty. And so I think a lot of people who are in a job search who aren't having the results they want, they will blame it on the job market, or blame it on ageism, or blame it on whatever. And if I was to sit down with them and look at the story that is being told about them as a candidate across their LinkedIn resume, etc., there are probably major changes, major and minor changes that they could make that might move the needle, but we all just want, an explanation. And so I think that too is amplifying, the narrative about ageism, the narrative about the job market, etc.
It's a hard one because it's being talked about so much at the moment with the amount of cuts that are happening. People are, yes, as you mentioned, you want to have a connection with somebody who's going through the same problem. And again, it's as you pointed out, it's in our nature to put the blame on something else rather than it's us that we have to look into. And that ties into my next kind of question. What I see sometimes in the industry is that sometimes people will kind of drop their ethics to make sure they still have their job. Now, what do I mean by that? Generally, what I'm seeing right now is that the industry is producing a lot of and I'd hate to use this terminology, it's not something I like, but they produce what they call pixel pushers. And people who just deliver on demand because they don't want to speak up in fear of losing their job. Now, have you come across people like this, or have you even experienced this working with CSL?
I mean, I've experienced it in my own career, like dealing with clients who, despite your best attempt to explain, why a certain design and approach is the right approach, and with examples from, competitors of successful products and failed products, etc., clients just say, no, I want you, just push the pixels, essentially, right? And in some cases, we did that. And in other cases, I remember I was working at an agency, I won't name them, but sometimes that resulted in that client being fired, Now, of course, not everyone has that luxury if you're, a full-time employee of a company. But I mean, that's how I've experienced it in my career. I'm curious, are you wondering, like, do we teach people how to deal with that in their job? Yeah.
I'm very kind of like interested because where I see it the most, and where I feel that where they're not actually labeled as pixel pushers, but they're not being utilized in their correct way, is UX researchers.
Right. Right.
UX researchers are being used, and this is how I've experienced it in my career. Product managers or product owners don't want to invest the time for a researcher to go and do something. And so what they tend to do, they don't use them for continuous discovery. What they tend to do is like, oh, we made something, now go and validate it.
Right.
You know? So
Right.
they experience the pixel pusher effect of, hey, you're not really utilizing me in my right way.
Right.
But then I heard and I spoke, actually it's my business partner. My business partner, she was the one who told me I didn't speak up because I was in fear of losing my job, and she told me that's why we started the company together, all three of us. I'm going to do some product placement in a second.
Yes, of course. We're business owners. That's what we do.
But we started Design Ops Aligned because we found companies were not really utilizing researchers. And she's a researcher and she's research ops. Oh, wow. It's amazing what they do there. And when she kind of sold what researchers do, businesses were like, we didn't even know that they could do half that stuff.
Right.
And she experienced that in her career. Nobody knew what half the stuff she could do. And that's what she's experiencing when she's speaking to people who come to her advice. It's like, how do I speak up and tell them that you can get more out of me without me losing my job? And that's why I really wanted to know, how are you helping people with that?
Yeah. Okay, one thing that comes to mind is, when you're trying to, for example, explain like the value of research beyond just go test this homepage or checkout we made. One of the things I tell people is, especially if you're internal at a company, think about finding examples in the company where research, was an afterthought, let's say, and try and highlight the consequences of that. So by skipping research, did they then need to spend another 3 months fixing something or removing a feature or adding a feature or, explaining why and how someone should use this feature, like a lot of kind of customer education and stuff like that. And my hunch is a lot of companies could find examples of the consequences of skipping research. And when you can go to your boss, your client, whomever, with those examples, it makes the conversation a little bit, I think, easier because you have kind of receipts to bring with you. And you're highlighting the pain points that were experienced as a result of skipping the research. So if you can paint a picture of, okay, this happened and no blame, but if we don't want that to happen again, here is how we could avoid that. And I think that is a really effective way, to approach it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the terminology, and I tell all researchers, use the terminology, we can mitigate risks. Our job is to help you mitigate risks.
Yeah.
And it's one of the famous statements that my business partner tells all of the people that she helps, use that terminology. My job is to mitigate your risk. And it just, you can see just that line of communication changes from, hey, we need to do this research because we can find out X, Y, Z, to, hey, I can do something and I can mitigate your risk. And you can just see that you spark the interest of everyone. I'm gonna play devil's advocate though.
Okay.
One of the things I always speak to, and we speak to a lot of product managers, and one of the things that they always tell me, and we've only got a few clients. Design Ops Align's only been around since August, so we're still babies in the front. But one of the things I've always heard back from them is a researcher goes off and they do what they call the big reveal after like 3 months of like disappearing. And I haven't heard a word from him. I've tried to email him and find out what's going on. And the researchers tend to think that they go away, do something, and they do this big reveal and they're going to expect some results. And this is what I find has been detrimental in that field for product owners or product managers to to really embrace them. Now, what's your take on that? I know that we're going a bit off, but I wanted to get your take on that one.
I think it happens a lot also. And I think many companies, when they hear research, they just see dollar signs and time,
Yeah.
And to your point, if you can reframe it to that risk mitigation, I think that's an excellent reframe. And I guess, is there a way that researchers can change the perception of what they do as just, a black box type thing? And instead of having a big reveal, are there things teams can do, to let their boss, client, whomever, kind of come along for the journey, whether that's like, I don't know, giving a cool insight that they discovered, before the final presentation or something like that. And I know some researchers would say like, no, that, don't do that, etc.
Yeah.
But, if we consider the users and customers of our research and the ultimate goal is to get them to, receive it, think about it, etc., maybe it is worth revealing some things before all of the research is complete. And I know some purists would not agree with that, but that's my take.
No, I think I totally agree with you, because my famous sentence, and I got this from a really cool product manager: exclusion breeds opposition.
Ooh, I like that. I'm going to write that down.
So I really love that one, because it's such, I think it's such a statement that applies to all of us. Exclusion breeds opposition, because when you don't bring in the right people, or people are not informed, you will just get pushback and pushback and pushback.
Yeah.
And if you bring them along the journey, as you mentioned, you get more buy-in, and you get to see things from different angles.
Yeah.
So.
Isn't it funny how, like, we're saying bring people along for the journey, and it's let's apply UX to this problem in our existence of if you're a researcher and people aren't believing your research, you're getting pushback. Well, let's break it down,
Yeah.
UX that thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It can't be a podcast without speaking about AI.
Goodness.
So
okay.
I left that to the last bit, I wanted to make sure. But I wanted to get your take on this. Do you think the AI has increased the standards? Okay, let me put it in a better way. Do you think AI has now demanded an increase in our UX standards and expectations from hiring managers, product owners? What's your take on that?
I'm going to riff on this a little bit. So let me know if I go off track. But I think, if you're asking, will AI take our jobs, etc.? I think no.
I don't think that. But do you think the expectations of us to deliver quicker, faster, polished designs, great designs, really thought out designs has now come about due to AI being there from your perspective?
To be honest, I haven't spoken to anyone about this, so I can't, say for sure based on conversations with hiring managers, I'm seeing this or not. I could see recruiters who maybe, because who are recruiters? Let's understand our customer if we're a job seeker, right? I mean, ultimately, a recruiter is a customer if we get pretty literal. Some recruiters have worked in user experience. Others have not necessarily worked in user experience, but they know the terminology, enough about the industry, etc. If you think of recruitment companies, there are internal recruiters who maybe were working in UX, and then there's big recruitment agencies where those people are just professional recruiters, right? And so I think there could be a situation where recruiters who have never worked as a UX designer may make that assumption, right? That like, well, you should be able to work faster with AI, et cetera. And maybe recruiters, hiring managers who have been in the trenches with us, so to speak, recognize, it all sounds nice and convenient and fast. But when we look at, the literal output of these, the software that says it can take the sketch and turn it into a full website, like people who've worked with that software and just worked in the industry know it's a good starting point, but there's still a lot of human touch that needs to go into it,
Yeah, absolutely.
And it lacks like AI for anything. It's still only as good as the information it is working off of. Like resumes, for example, lots of people say, well, can't I just use ChatGPT to write my resume? And I'm like, well, I guess you could, but you're going to have to give it so much input to accurately do that you may as well just write it from scratch. Like you'll be, you're going to go back and forth with it for so long, giving it all the information. Why not just write a crappy first draft yourself and then use it to like help you rephrase bullet points and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I tend to use, is just tweak up the language to make it sound a bit more professional.
Exactly.
I guess the reason why I asked you that question is because, I still use balsamic. I'm old school. I'm an old school UXer. I'm still in the wireframe and grayscales. And the reason why I wanted to pass that question to you is because, everyone uses Figma. And everyone is now looking into this AI within Figma. And again, this is my 2 cents. I think we will see an explosion that the UI will be automated, but the UX work is still going to be needed. That raw UX, I'm talking the scientific aspect, the information architecture, that is where I think we will rise. And that UI stuff, you can just do it with a prompt, and that's where I see the industry going,
Especially if there's an existing design system or something, right? I mean, then, I totally agree. And I think so much rework can be avoided, in my opinion, by working in low fidelity. And some people argue, well, stakeholders can't understand low fidelity and blah, blah, blah. And I think, well, then maybe you're not doing a good enough job explaining to your stakeholders, like, this is a wireframe. We're not focused on the visuals yet. It's like a storyboard for a movie. We're not deciding what color outfits the characters are wearing. We're talking about like what's happening between scene 1 and 7, But I think that there's still a ton of value in the experience design process that can help eliminate so much rework once. I'm gonna bring you back on the podcast, because that's another discussion. Like how come product managers not think abstractly, and why can they not read wireframes? Because I have heard that quite a lot, but there's an art to wireframing. Just as you would do with UI design, there's an art to actually presenting it and saying, this is not what's going to be the final thing, but we'll bring that for another podcast, Sarah. Gosh, I would love that. I have all kinds of thoughts.
Sarah, I would love to get your take on the Career Strategy Lab offers so much. And I would love people who are listening to this podcast, and I know you help mid to senior levels, and a lot of focus on that, but when would be the right time to reach out to you, to your company, and what would be your statement for getting people to come to you for help?
I think there's a couple of stages of someone's career and job search. Maybe you've been working, like we discussed earlier, for a number of years already, and you're thinking to yourself, I'm not sure what the next chapter of my career would look like, or you're feeling like you reached a plateau in terms of skill or salary or just interest and fulfillment in your career. That could be one type of person, because one of the first things we do in Career Strategy Lab is have everyone develop essentially a career roadmap for their career, like product roadmap. And that is so important, because without that, when you sit down to do your resume or decide what jobs to apply to, you end up wasting a lot of energy because you don't have those guardrails in place, let's say. So that's one type of person. And then other types of people are definitely people who want to be ready to apply to jobs in case an awesome opportunity comes their way, or let's be real, in case they're laid off. And then there's also those people who have been in a job search for a while and they're not getting those results they're looking for. The type of person that would not be a good fit is, Career Strategy Lab's 3-month program is not free. I have a team of people that I pay, and it can't be free. And we have a lot of free resources between our podcast and YouTube, etc. But, if you are approaching the end of your financial runway, etc., we definitely don't want you to come to us and spend your last dollar hoping that we will be your, miracle solution, because on our website, we do not guarantee that you'll get hired. And our stance on that, it's controversial, but ultimately we say no one can guarantee you'll get hired unless they're the person signing the job offer, right?
Yeah.
And that's not the business we're in. So as you can tell, I'm pretty blunt and we tell it like it is. And so we try and be very clear about that, because I don't want someone to put themselves in a bad financial situation.
Yeah. And I love that. I love the honesty, because people who come to, and I've seen it, and I'm not going to put names on people or who they are. I've seen them where they say, I can guarantee you this, I can guarantee you that. And it's like, no, you are selling a false promise. And if you're honest from the get-go that, hey, I can't guarantee you the job, but I can give you the tools needed to find it, that's something I can definitely guarantee. And I love that. I love that, your ethos in your company. So
thank you.
I just want to ask one more last question, and before we wrap up. Do you think that it's a European terminology, so let me know if I need to explain it.
All right.
Do you think the spray and pray methodology works? Do you know what the spray and pray is?
Yeah.
Okay. What's your what's your thoughts on that? Cool.
No.
Can you tell me why that doesn't work?
Yeah. It doesn't work because you're playing this numbers game, and it's partially about your time. If you're spending all this time applying, then you don't have the time to do other things that can actually result in helping you stand out. For example, I say to people, when you apply to a job, sometimes even before, try and nurture relationships with people who work at that company. And if you're applying to 50 jobs a day, it's unsustainable to think that you're going to be following up or writing custom cover letters, tailoring your resume, tailoring your portfolio, etc. So we are huge advocates of not playing the numbers game, doing the spray and pray approach, and instead applying to fewer jobs, more of the right jobs, and taking time to nurture relationships and the applications, and tailoring your materials for each role. And I know people, when they hear me say tailor your materials, they think that's unfair. How is someone supposed to have time for that? But if you have a really strong kind of baseline resume and portfolio to begin with, tailoring could just mean you're reordering bullet points, adding a few, removing a few. Same with your portfolio. And it's not like an 8-hour effort. It's hopefully a 30-minute effort or less.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Sarah, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the show. It's been brilliant to have you on. And yeah, you proper resonate from what I've seen you on LinkedIn and having you on the show and what you speak about. I can see the direct relation, like everything you post
Wonderful.
about. It's really everything you advise about. It really does speak ethos in your company. I'm not just saying that because you're on this podcast show. I really think what you're doing is helping a lot of people. And yeah, it's such an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you. And I have to credit my team also. I mean, it's not just me. Lots of people don't know, but we have a small and mighty team behind the scenes. So it couldn't happen without everyone.
Yeah, I had to jump a lot of hoops to get Sarah on. So her team made me jump many hoops. But I got her here. No, they were a brilliant team. They responded very, very quick. And, you know, we spoke, we went backward and forward with some ideas and we got Sarah on the show and it happened very, very quick. So they're an amazing team.
Yeah.
An amazing team. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you.